Hello, and welcome to the 12th Annual Naples International Film Festival. My name is David Filner, and I am the Executive Vice President, Artistic Operations at Artis Naples. And on behalf of everyone at Artis Naples and the Naples International Film Festival, I'd like to thank you for joining us for this special TalkBack Q&A. We'd also like to thank our TalkBack Q&A sponsors, Stan and Saran Crosshar, for their support. Now, it's my very great pleasure to introduce three filmmakers from the documentary film, The Last Out. We have the co-directors Sami and Michael Gassert, and producer Jonathan Miller. Welcome.
Thanks, David.
Thanks a lot, David.
So first of all, let me just sort of set the stage. Where are you all at this point? Where are we talking to you from, since you're not in Naples?
We're all in different places. I'm in Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah, so am I. I'm also in Brooklyn.
Okay.
I'm in Sarnia, Ontario, Canada. Looking out at Michigan.
Okay, excellent. Well, we're glad to have you all here virtually in Naples. So this film I was fascinated by this film. I like baseball. I'm not a huge baseball fan, but I just thought it was such an interesting story. Can you tell me a little bit about how you came upon this story? How did it get created, and how did you find these baseball players that you focused on?
Yeah, I can jump in. So, for the three of us, as we got older, and the three of us are all, avid sports fans, and also we like to think of ourselves as somewhat deep thinkers, although that's maybe more posturing than actual truth. But we started to think about the story behind the story. What's the cost for the sport to be put on? What does it take a player to make it to the pro leagues? And when we started the project, which is way back in 2014, there was this wave of defections from Cuba, really dangerous defections, including Yasiel Puig, Jose Abreu, many stories of really perilous crossings from Cuba to Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Haiti. I'm the son of immigrants, and I think there was something about that immigrant journey that really crystallized at least an approach to the story. And so the three of us just started talking. We started filming interviews around Cuban baseball and this sort of thematic idea of a kind of an immigrant's journey from Cuba to the United States. And one of the first interviews, although it was really difficult to eventually get him to agree to it, was with Gus, the agent in the film. Eventually, in early 2015, we got an interview with Gus, and he mentioned at the end of that interview, which was like a long sort of emotional interview where he laid out his journey, his own personal journey. He mentioned that he had these four Cuban baseball players down in Costa Rica, and would we want to go down there and visit them? And then when we met Happy Carlos Barro, we kind of found that this was a story that was taking place in the present, and that's like when we went down there, that's the first showcase that you see in the film. Yeah, I mean, from there it just took off, and we had found that present tense active story.
So when with Gus, I mean, it's sort of, I mean, the way the film plays out, there's sort of hints that this is a dangerous thing, but then that first experience where you see those players, they're happy, they're positive. There's these things happen, and then obviously it takes a turn for the worse as it goes through. When you were starting with this with them, I mean, did you have any idea kind of the dark places that it was really going to go? And I can imagine that both having it be going that dark place, but also like if one of them ended up getting to the major leagues, that's sort of two very different options for the way things could have gone. Where were you thinking about where it was going to go when you first started?
Well, I think when Sami keyed into this story, one of the things that we understood early on is there are these dark elements, unfortunately, that so many, and mostly well-intended people have to participate in as a result of this complex political situation with the embargo and whatnot. But as it relates to real human beings, as Sami was describing, we came into this story through Gus. So, in some of our other shooting and research up to that point, before we latched onto Gus and the guys in Costa Rica, we had a sense of this underworld and some of the things that, the dark side of it, as you alluded to. But as it became real and we understood the bigger picture that maybe Gus didn't fully, for good reason, protecting his own interests, reveal to us early on, and we got closer and closer to Happy and Carlos and Baro, those things became really real. I mean, we're, as Sami is saying, more than just sports fans or filmmakers. We're, conscientious human beings, and these guys became our friends. And as when the rubber, meets the road and they have to make tough choices, that was some of the more difficult parts of it for us.
Was it, once it started getting a little bit more dark, did Gus, was he less cooperative? I mean, it really, the film doesn't paint him in the best of lights.
I would say that, going back a little bit, when we first sort of latched onto these guys and that we were going to follow them wherever it would lead, we didn't have a sense of, like, we thought the dark stuff in some ways was in the past, and we were kind of approaching it as delicately as we could, and like, how can we get this into the movie? How can we explore this? How can we understand this better? But we were in a lot of ways sort of on the same ride that they were on, and that we were like as optimistic and hopeful about where it would go. And that, we were very close to Gus at the beginning, and as a lot of time passed and we tried to, be as fair as possible to Gus throughout the film. But yeah, I think we didn't know where it was going, and we were in the dark a lot of the way. And so some of these things we only began to understand in the edit later, what was actually happening and what was, happening between the lines and all that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are some very, it felt, just watching it, some dangerous moments on the traveling, trying to get to the US through that period. How did you, who was actually there with them when they went? Well, I can't remember which one it was that was on the bus. Was it Happy was on the bus?
Yeah, that's Happy.
And with, did you have multiple people there, and did it feel dangerous for you as filmmakers to be involved in that?
It was, Mike was alluding a minute ago to like difficult decisions, and that was Mike. Mike captured those dangerous moments, and he, I think for all of us, obviously for Mike most vividly, those moments, that fall were really pivotal in the project. And Mike had just come back from Costa Rica for a trip, and then he called me or texted me and told me that he just got a text message from Happy, that he had been unceremoniously cut, and had to face this decision. And to speak for him a little bit, I mean, he didn't really hesitate. I tried to facilitate, logistics, equipment, and all that stuff, and we hatched a plan to replace him on this job and meet him at the airport. But then he dove in and, had fostered this relationship with Happy, this really remarkable friendship. And then, went on that harrowing trip with him.
And just to take it back a little bit to both what Sami and John were saying earlier, as participants in this project, we were along for the ride with the guys as well. And the tremendous work Sami did in order to develop this relationship with Gus early on. I think a lot of people tried to tell his story. We came into the story, as I said, through him and through his lens. And in a sense, we're framing it as, wow, look at you know, what happened to him. Maybe he was wrongfully accused in the past and indicted and served his time, and here he is trying to redeem himself with this new group of guys. But as we understood the bigger picture of the story and our relationships grew with not just Gus, but Happy and the other guys, we understood like not only more information in the darker side and things that Happy and Carlos and all the other guys had to go through just to get to Costa Rica before we met them. But, you know, Gus as well, and the information that he was protecting and how his relationship with the guys and the players started to unravel. So as we, you know, spend so much time down there, it became a no-brainer for us. You know, we had been waiting so long for somebody to sign, and it felt like, you know, Carlos was about to sign. And I think we had the sense for both the unraveling of Happy and the potential of a signing just by getting closer to the guys and Gus as well. You know, we spent time with him and the coaches in the hotel. But when we saw, you know, just how things went down, I mean, I think some people are very understanding of Gus as a businessman and the tough decisions they have to make. And, you know, we've had Roberto, one of the coaches, on a lot of these Q&As, and he's spoken about how difficult it was for them, you know, to actually release Happy. But, you know, we were a little bit taken aback by how it happened, but also, you know, we knew that we had to follow the story wherever it took us, you know, with Happy, you know, and the other guys. It just wasn't going to be a footnote to Gus's story.
So when you were actually traveling with Happy, I would imagine there's like sort of the I don't know the right way to say it, but the sort of humanity of like, this is your friend you've been hanging out with, but then you're also a filmmaker. Is there a sort of a line of not being too active in terms of just saying, oh, hey, here, I'm going to give you some money so you can, you know, help out and fly to LA, or, you know, something like that, versus your role as a filmmaker?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we lost Sami for a moment, but hopefully he'll jump back in. Yeah, obviously, you know, there is that sort of ethical line when you talk about things theoretically. Like once you start paying your documentary subjects, then what are you doing? Something different. You're changing their reality. You're making something more like reality TV or something like this. That being said, you know, those are the choices that we make all the time as filmmakers, is how much are we influencing, you know, the people that we're documenting. Obviously, you're going to be part of their reality, but to be the central part of their reality, decision-making or facilitators, I think, you know, in my opinion, you know, might be crossing the line in terms of you're shaping that reality. So, I mean, when it comes to those decisions on the road, you know, we were looking out for each other, and you can see, you know, the tough choices that Happy had to make just to be able to afford his own way. You know, we were all looking out for each other's safety. I mean, you saw we were traveling with Happy's cousin and their young child, and you know, at that point, I felt like it was part of my responsibility to look out for the group as they were looking out for me. So. And also I had another responsibility on behalf of Sami and John to protect the film and what we had captured thus far, and, you know, all of those choices to continue following Happy and just try to stay with him as far as possible. You know, all those things came into play there. So, but I just want to recap for Sami if he's connected. We were sort of talking about, you know, helping out the guys with money and when you're traveling along the way, you know, and sort of
ethics,
that fine line.
Ethics as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
Actually, Mike, following up on the other question, can you just speak to like what were the scariest parts of that trip, like crossing the river, or were you not scared because you had a camera and you were on this mission? Like, what did that feel like?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I mean, I think you understand it, Sami, as well, because, you know, we're all filmmakers. But for other folks, you know, in certain things in life, you just go into another mode. It's not necessarily survival mode, but your senses are heightened, and, you know, there's a directive, there's a place where you're going, even though it may be unclear. So I don't know if I can pinpoint a certain moment. I think we understood some of the risks, the increased risks leading up to the crossing into Mexico. But you know, there were other moments where it was like things were uncertain. There was a time, you know, when we all connected in Honduras, Happy and I, and with Lorenzo and Marianas and that crew, you know, Honduras operates a little differently, where they were giving Cubans free passage, essentially. They call it salvoconducto. If you report yourself at an immigration office, you have to sort of wait around for a couple days, and they'll give you a document which allows you to leave the country, make your way to a border without being arrested. I don't know if you have a week or a month, this sort of thing. So I had to sort of hang around and linger around one of these immigration offices while the whole crew was sort of getting their paperwork done after a few days of hanging out in the city. And I sort of had to sneak onto this bus. Well, Happy paid the bus driver my fare and said, hey, there's going to be a gringo with a green hat is going to get onto the bus. But it was, you know, 40 Cubans heading north through Honduras. And I was keeping it pretty low key with Happy on that trip. And there was inspections and this sort of thing, until I sort of realized that everybody around there was embracing the idea that I was documenting their travesía, their trip, their journey. So, so yeah.
Great. So obviously the film, it's a long time period, and a lot of it was sort of based in Costa Rica. From a, I guess, a production standpoint, how difficult was it? How did you manage that? Did you have set times that you went down to Costa Rica to do filming? Were you just there for long periods and saw what happened? Did you know there were kind of going to be inflection points in these stories beforehand?
I would say that this is a film where we did definitely have plans at the beginning, but a lot of this ended up being follow it as it happens and as available. And like Mike made a bunch of trips down to Costa Rica where he would just be embedded with the guys, kind of waiting for something to happen. And that's kind of where the amazing intimacy in the film comes from, is that presence over a long period of time. And I think this is the communication, and we did not get a lot of information about what was going to happen, when it was going to happen. A lot of it was just, you had to be there. And, you know, we'd be down there for a week and a half, all three of us, and, you know, we'd get some great stuff. And then, you know, 2 days later, with only Mike there, something amazing would happen, or like Mike would leave and then find out Happy was getting cut and go right back down. So it was a very, you know, be flexible approach.
Yeah.
And that, back to, you know, sort of what you were getting at earlier with Gus, and some of that dexterity, I think, and that aesthetic really comes through. You know, for example, that first showcase where the three of us are down there, and John's shooting on a long lens, and I'm focusing on sound, and Sami's keying into all of the stuff that's going on. We're able to cover, you know, a bigger sort of event that's going on, and get these intimate moments with the guys. Or if it's John going down to Dominican Republic and capturing amazing stuff with Baró, or Sami and I relaying information between Costa Rica and LA, being like, hey, Sami, this is what the guys are saying down here about, you know, Gus and his promises and everything, you know, the promises that he told them initially coming out of Cuba, and how they're not really being realized. And as you see in the film, Sami is able to take that right to Gus. And, you know, in terms of, you know, we're able, I think, to step back and look at Gus as a character and as a human being, as a, you know, complex individual. But the film maybe didn't turn out to the personal portrait that maybe he thought it was going to be. But I think we were fair to him and gave him his fair say. And that dexterity that we had, even as a 3-person unit operating in different areas, allowed us to have that, you know, quick change of information and keep everybody to account.
What kind of reaction have you had from, especially those 4 principals, the 3 players and Gus, to the finished film?
Sammy, you want to grab that one?
Sure, I'll apologize for my internet connection. I'll try it, and if I cut out, I don't know. Maybe my somebody's downloading Avengers in 4K somewhere in this house.
We hear you
But
well.
Sounds good now.
but as we kind of talked about, we really made the film collaboratively, especially with the guys. And there were times where the edit was a challenge, was one of the biggest challenges to the film. You can't compare with crossing the border, the Mexican border, in the middle of the night with a baby, but it was a challenge
Pretty close,
creatively.
though. And
Whereas-
Sammy let us out of the woods, in that crossing, but yeah.
But like a documentary, the advantage is you shoot it and then you worry about it later, and boy did we worry about it. So the guys had seen cuts, I forget now. I mean, at least 2 years ago they had started to see cuts of the film. They responded to this account of their lives, and John was mentioning earlier about how we started to see the pieces of the puzzle connected together, and it started to make sense to us. And the same was true. I mean, it was especially true for them, especially for Carlos, who was not privy to as much information, I think, as the other guys, and sort of had to endure more than Happy, because Happy was cut earlier, and Otto had some family connections that gave him some more access, a better relationship with Violone. And I think that I think Carlos, we were doing one of these Q&As a couple of weeks ago, and he said something like, this was my life, this is the reality of my life for those years. And I think we're really touched by that sort of fidelity to their story, because we weren't out to make a lifestyle piece. We're not, it's not, I don't know, Entertainment Tonight, we're not, even sports journalism has moved, into a different realm now. And as far as Gus, while he's not happy, he's seen the film, he's not happy with it. We made a commitment to him to tell the truth, the unvarnished truth, not to sensationalize things, not to take the edge off. So for the three of us, I think we take comfort in that commitment we made to the truth, and despite it being really difficult at times.
So you said that you all three are sports fans. I don't know how much baseball is at the top of your list, but after going through this experience and sort of seeing this other side of baseball, do you look at that game differently than you did prior to making this film?
That's a great question. Yeah.
I'd say we look at all sports differently. I think that there's a sort of getting into the perspective of the players and kind of understanding all the people it takes to fill those, few spots in the professional leagues, and what people go through, and what the risks they take, the odds that are against them, the commitment, the level of professionalism it requires, to even get to the very it's incredible.
And I think, especially now as we're seeing in the public sphere, that it's just undeniable to separate sports and our social reality and everything that we're living through. And this idea of, shut up and dribble, and, it just doesn't pass anymore. And I think when we think of the role of sports, we think about our entitlement that it exists to entertain us, especially professional sports. And, we can talk about the value of, participating in team sports as a youth and this sort of thing. But, from our perspective as fans of the game and the high level of the game, and even just going back to sort of that boyhood dream, we hold these athletes on a pedestal, and we sometimes think of them as superhuman, but we tend to dehumanize them at the same time. So, when we're thinking about the true role of sports, it's really to reveal humanity, not only the humanity of these players and folks behind the organizations, but of us as individuals. Like, how do we respond in stadiums, when these demonstrations are taking place, or when an athlete raises their voice? So, you know, I think if we can be part of that conversation to just help create a little bit of empathy, not just within the sports world, but with anybody who lives outside of your own individual experience.
Another thing for me, I think is important here in 2020, which is what the pandemic sort of revealed, is all the things we take for granted, all the people we take for granted. You know, what does it take for, you know, here in Ontario, for example, a peach to get here in October? You know, peaches should have stopped like a month ago. But the trucker who drives it here, the migrant farm worker who's working in California or wherever to farm that from, who's left their home in Mexico or Jamaica, wherever that is. You know, I hear stories as, you know, sort of comfortably middle class, or people complaining about fridges, that you can't buy a fridge now because the supply chain has been disrupted, and that sort of you know, wrinkle in the supply chain. And we live in a culture of convenience. We just take things for granted. Even a cell phone, like the centuries of science that went in to put a satellite into space, so, you know, the three of us could communicate over this project. But we take so much for granted, and especially we take people for granted, whether it's first responders, whether it's truckers, whether it's farm workers, whether it's immigrants. It's not just like about getting on you know, taking a bus from Tijuana to San Diego, from Nuevo Laredo to Laredo, Texas. It's a journey. People are leaving for reasons to make their lives better for themselves. And, you know, I think we're so immune, and here in North America, in the northern part of North America, at least, from the risks and the consequences of what people deal with, that COVID, if there is a silver lining, has hopefully, for some people, has sort of shattered that bubble and shown that we're a lot more interconnected than we'd like to admit.
Great. Well, that's actually sort of potentially a segue, which is, now that you've, you know, brought this film into the world, and it's out there at festivals and doing well. What are your next projects? What are the next stories that you want to be telling?
Sami's been writing on an amazing show on NBC called Transplant. So Sami, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm a writer and producer on like Mike said, it's a show called Transplant. It airs tonight, Tuesdays at 10 o'clock on NBC. And it's about a Syrian, I mean, it's a medical show, but the hook is that the protagonist is a Syrian refugee. So hopefully shares some thematic resonance rather. You know, Mike's working on a cool project about a really talented musician from the Dominican, who is this kind of like really charismatic figure, and sort of kind of has that same intimate verite approach.
Mm-hmm. And Jonathan, what's next for you?
Well, I was going to, my wife and I are big fans of Transplant. I've got a doc called Black Box, which is about a Eastern Airlines crash in Bolivia in 1985 that we were shooting before the pandemic, and is, you know, deep in the edit. It's one of these things that, you know, there's probably too much footage to fit into a feature, and we're going to have to, much like we did on this movie, cut it very tight and lose a lot of storylines in order to get it there. I also did a little work on the new Borat that's coming out, which I'm very excited because I haven't seen it yet.
That's always like hilarious, as like, you know, John's friend, where you're talking to him, I think back in the spring or before COVID, and it's like, oh, John, where are you going right now? It's like, why can't you have this call with us? It's like, I can't talk about it, guys. I can't talk about it. It's like, oh, that's really suspicious. So John's either a secret agent or he's working with Sacha Baron Cohen.
Yeah, it's from like mountains in Bolivia to secret NDAs where you can't tell people where you are. Yeah, it's great.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for the time and really for sharing this really wonderful film with our audiences. We appreciate it, and we really wish you best of all the luck.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Naples. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Great.
Thanks. It means a lot, especially to be able to share the film with, you know, audiences in Florida, and, you know, there's a lot of connection not only to to our characters, but just the themes in the film. So we're really grateful.
Yes. Great. Well, thanks.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks so much.